We are right now in Lighthouse Legal Advisory Media platform. My name is Anastasiia Dziuba. I'm a lawyer, legal advisor, and today we have wonderful guest, Piplas, Dr. Haris. Could you please short introduce yourself for our followers, and then we will discuss the hot topic about the experience of Sarajevo in the reconstruction of Ukraine, because we have a wonderful specialist today with us.
Thank you a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share some insights, experiences, ideas, reflections, and I'm very much looking forward also to interact with the future audience and to think together how the recovery of Ukrainian cities and communities can happen in a more successful way. I have a background that is transdisciplinary. I studied urbanism, landscape, and architecture. So my background and competence include elements that are physical space, architecture, infrastructure, but also very important, the social and ecological layers in cities. So the social, the human centric approach, but also the ecological layers, the landscapes, and the nature of a city. Because a city, we have to understand, as a system, as an ecosystem itself. I studied in Berlin, in Sarajevo, but also in Milano, and did my doctoral degree at Zurich, at ETH. And since my early career years, I engaged in post-war and post-socialist transformation of cities. Partly it's because of my personal history. I spent the majority of my childhood in two cities that went through almost comparable phenomena. Berlin and Sarajevo both went through, and not comparable in terms of the context, but it still went to war destruction and an economic and political transition. And we grew up in this volatile environment where geopolitics and transformation is in your vicinity, you're surrounded by it, you start thinking of the context. And now we are here sitting today at Dresden Sommer, which is a large international planning, consultancy, engineering office. I have the pleasure to direct the integrated urban solutions team that looks into what we mentioned in the beginning, how transdisciplinary approaches can be used in cities, that we deal with mobility and biodiversity and technology and space and people, and how this all is related to Ukraine. And I'm happy to dive in more into experiences in Ukraine for the last 12 years. It's already 12 years since my first visit to Kyiv.
Wonderful. I think we have the great experience with you today, and we have the wonderful opportunity to deep dive into the experience of the post-war in Sarajevo. And from my perspective right now, we have from the one hand really structured process of the Rebuild Ukraine procedure from the Swiss side that SECO is leading together with DETSA and with a single project pipeline from Ukrainian side. From the other hand, a lot of businesses in Switzerland and in Ukraine, they don't understand the rules of the game, and the system, the rebuild of the cities should have the stages and should be combined from different players, as you said. Energy sector, renewable energy, construction, biodiversity, social sites, and so on and so forth. From your experience, what do you think, if you have the investment package to rebuild the cities or the part of the cities, which layers you should develop first to avoid the risks during the construction? And the second question is, we spoke with you about the legislation issue, because we are right now in Switzerland, and Swiss law, Swiss legislation, European best standards and legislation, they are not the same with Ukrainian standards. That's why right now we have the situation when the investment package or private equity or foundation donation are going to Ukraine, and it goes through the special tax regime from international technical help to Ukraine from one hand. From another hand is like the normal investment package, and the legislation is not the same. That's why a lot of companies who are starting to construct, they cannot start, because in Ukraine the norms and standards are not the same. That's why we have like the blockers from the legal side. What do you think in this case we should do first?
Yes. Thank you for the questions. I think when we start with the first question is what topics, layers are important and in recovery. The traditional international aid and development cooperation in the field of infrastructure, and infrastructure has a very broad meaning, went traditionally to topics such as energy, water, waste, so strong focus on technical infrastructure. And this is, to be very transparent, this is what I see in many international projects, platforms, and initiatives in Ukraine. Yes, a city has a waste water plant is important, energy supply is very important, as we know in Ukraine, heating, and mobility and technical infrastructure and roads and bridges are very important, but the recovery of a society goes beyond technical infrastructure. The focus on the ecological and social recovery and the focus on housing, and how many of these monofunctional housing estates can be multifunctionalized, how can be renovated, how can be transformed into a more livable place. Social spaces such as schools and kindergartens. And the thinking of public and green space very often becomes secondary in these traditional infrastructure programs and facilities. And this is what I observed in other post-war countries, where this second step, where you really have to look into the social infrastructures, never really comes. And I'm aware that it's more difficult to give out loans and programs on complex features and areas such as a neighborhood. The neighborhood includes mobility and waste and energy and housing. And I know that in the loan programs, it's very easier to give the loan to buy new electrobuses or to repair a bridge or to construct a wastewater plant. But that's not comprehensive recovery. That's only one aspect. Mm-hmm. And this is what I talked to many governments and to European Investment Bank and many others claiming what I just mentioned. And the second topic is what you asked on the legal aspects. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an urbanist and architect, but what I've seen, for example, in other places is that the programs and the projects that are being introduced very often come with the philosophy of is it a donor country or is it someone who initiates the program? And I think this is highly legitimate and great, but the expertise has to be adapted to a particular legal context. And the planning system in Ukraine is different than the one in Germany, and the construction laws are different in Denmark compared to Western or Central Ukraine. And this is something we have to take into consideration.
If you, for example, have the multi-stakeholder project or multi-investment project, who, from your perspective, is responsible to create the pre-feasibility study or feasibility study, including the due diligence, compliance, and legal check from the different legislation?
Yeah.
and who should be involved, which kind of experts from the different sides. And I know that you have experience to work as a consultant for this kind of massive project. So what is the like highlights of this kind of work, and who is responsible to review it?
That's an important question, because we talk about visions. So the urbanists and the planners are very often producing these beautiful images, the future. It's almost like foresight of how a place can develop. And then we have these very technical projects, and to bridge this technical implementation and the early visioning is not easy. And that's why many projects fail, or they're not successful enough. And if we have the opportunity to have holistic feasibility studies and master plans and due diligence checks, etc., that's something that it really guarantees a success and implementation of a project. And this is where you really need a broad team of experts, and they have to be working together. You see, many of these international tenders, they look for a list of few individual experts that are supposed to somehow work together, coming from 3-4 different companies. It's very difficult. You need an orchestrated team. Mm-hmm. When we talk, for example, about how everything comes together, to synthesize it into a urbanistic master plan that includes the economic feasibility and viability, that includes the water management concept, that includes energy concepts and feasibilities, including geothermal and solar. It includes mobility, but micro-mobility as well as large-scale mobility. It becomes a very thick document, and you need an orchestrated team. It's not a job, and maybe it's different in other professions, but an individual consultant can't do much. You need an orchestrated team. You need also senior, but also junior people on board, and this is very important for the team setup to have it that way, that it really allows to work in a holistic way. Otherwise, it's just fragments, professional fragments,
exactly.
That do not really communicate with each other, that are not related in terms of the timeline, that are not related in terms of methodology, and then you have these individual pieces of paper that do not become they're different melodies, but they never become a real symphony, and this is something that is missing in projects.
I have a playground experience, and part of Harvard University course for Rebuild Ukraine, and we have as a teamwork, as the diploma, the pre-feasibility study for housing for the city of the future, and the thing is that we have 30 people there, the people who are like very senior position in PwC, in the big construction companies, in like really, for example, in private-public partnership, the colleagues from Dream Ukraine. Yeah. And we are doing the pre-feasibility study, but we have the mess because we have the experts from the different sides, and everybody are doing something, some little question from the legislation side, from the construction side, from the social vulnerability study side, but it's not synchronized. Yeah. And my question is, what in this kind of multiple projects, multi-stakeholder and multi-expert projects, how to orchestrate the team, and which first 3 or 5 layers should be discovered before to add some more experts?
Yeah. No, for sure. That's a question that I'm being exposed to more or less in every project. I have very often the luck or the bad luck to be this orchestrator or this curator. Mm-hmm. And this is where you need quite a broad educational background, empathy, and then knowledge of also vocabulary, because one word a word, the term model or policy can mean 5 different things to 5 different experts working on the same project. So this demystification and orchestration is quite a magical, but it is also a difficult task. And there's a reason why we call our team the Integrated Urban and Infrastructure Solutions team. And because we do have expertise in-house that covers different competences, but also many partners, also local offices, experts, engineers, designers, consultants, etc. And in this sense, starting with the pre-feasibility layers, starting with a contextual understanding, a site assessment, for example. We call it to understand the talent, what is this site or location? What's its talent? You know, what can it do? What can it produce? And in this sense, understanding the potentials, understanding the resources becomes crucial, because before you start designing and planning and doing some high technical engineering, you need to understand the potentials and resources. And resources are natural resources, ecosystem service resources. Those are social and human relational resources. Who do you have in this particular site, in this neighborhood, who can connect you to, has the knowledge, who can connect you to further investors or politicians, etc. So we have to be way more, and this is what we try to be, way more modest and really go understand these resources in situ and activate them. But first you need this site assessment, you need this, as we say in German, Standortanalyse. So you really need this understanding of a place, and then to see how can these potentials and resources and limitations, of course, I mean, we work in areas where you have the soil is contaminated. You can be the most creative architect and imagine museums and operas to be built if the soil is contaminated. So there is many of these questions that we have to ask ourselves.
So what we do and what we...
Yes.
What we should really expect in the nearest future, let's say, so 2, 3, maybe 5 years. Let's do the prediction. What we have in Ukraine right now, in Rebuild Ukraine projects from Switzerland and from Ukraine, if we will compare with the situation in Sarajevo. What do you think we should afraid for, and what we could do to avoid the house after war will be ended?
Sarajevo. A magical city by its history and its neuralgic point, character and reality. It has been placed into, I mean, Sarajevo was a buffer zone between different worlds since the division of the Roman Empire went through more or less Sarajevo, and division of the church in 1054, and the line between the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires and Venice and many others. There's a reason why the First World War started there. It's not a coincidence, etc., etc. So it's a special place, and where you could really, it can be this geopolitical or macroeconomic litmus test for the world. And this is the reason probably why it also experienced positive and negative destinies in its history. So it has been the Olympic city in '84. Not that there's beautiful mountains around the city and ski slopes, but Sarajevo didn't get to host the Olympic Games because of its touristic infrastructure, because Sarajevo was this in-between city, between different worlds. And the tragedy just hit 8 years later, and this devastating war started, which I experienced myself, so I can talk from first hand. And what was astonishing, and if not frustrating and strange and awkward, is how much of the international and national and regional support did not create a change, which it could. It's a city of 400,000 people, and you have to imagine, because it was this favorite child almost of Europe, you have the entire world shows solidarity with the city. So you have Princess Diana, Michael Jackson, Michael Schumacher, the Pope. And to finish my thought in terms of why then did Reconstruction largely, if you say largely, failed, is there's a few arguments, there's a few points. One is that many international projects were not coordinated. So sometimes they were excluding each other, sometimes they did not know about each other, sometimes they were duplicating. So a coordination, curatorship agency did not really exist. Second one is maybe something you understand better, is about adaptation, renewal of legal and regulatory frameworks. I mean, you can't just plan a post-war, post-socialist city with planning instruments that, even socialist era, they were quite interesting, some very beneficial planning instruments, urban planning instruments, building codes, but you have to adapt it, you have to renew it, and this didn't happen. And the lack of inclusion of local experts, local communities, local citizens. Mm-hmm. So many of these feasibility studies, master plans were very technical, very often in the lead led by international experts, etc., which is great. You need global expertise. We are global experts, but you need to put it down on the ground. And this is something we really would like to avoid seeing in Ukrainian cities.
By the way, I know that you have a huge experience to work with Ukrainian cities, and you're working with the Ukrainian communities within a comprehensive recovery program.
Yes.
What practical tools have you already been implemented?
I work since 2014 with Ukrainian cities, communities, and colleagues on many different endeavors. So when with some other colleagues, and I hope some of the Connection colleagues will also look at this interview, starting this Connection School of Urban Studies in Kiev, being there for the first time, 2014, in the jury for the transformation of the future kind of human-centered design of the Maidan Square, etc. This was my first little task in Ukraine, building up the school with colleagues in order to have an education of future architects, urbanists, and experts in a more progressive way, in a more contemporary way. Being involved in e-mobility in public space projects and hubs in Lviv. And also later we worked, and I still work with the Lviv City Institute on different recovery projects. They have, of course, large issues with refugees, etc., and destruction. We work with the city of Chernivtsi, German Czernowitz, on how the mobility, public space, and a suburban industrial area can be transformed, revitalized, called Prut. Worked also with Zaporizhia. I remember some moments in the past. Therese Sommer, our office, did also before the full-scale invasion, some medical facilities in Kryvyi Rih. So there is a range of activities that we covered, that I had the pleasure to be involved, and also what you just mentioned, this recovery. We realized that, coming back to the critique of the failed recovery of Sarajevo, this comprehensive methodology, even though it was initiated by the ministry, but the methodology wasn't given. So we sit together, National Union of Architects, my colleague Lydia Czajewska, and many others, to develop a methodology. It's just a summary of what we discussed this evening, of a ecological, social, urban, physical recovery, and tested it out in different communities. One is Makarev, for the people who do not know Ukraine. This is in and in between Lviv and Kiev, 50 kilometers approximately west of Kiev, and in a Bucha region entire area was deliberated, left with human and infrastructural destruction, human tragedy. So in this sense, working there with the community, and later UN Habitat joined and on board. So it is about implementing change in not just in the big cities that are, of course, Lviv and Kiev and Odessa. I mean, the attention goes there, but we have to work with Chernivtsi, with Sumy, with Kryvyi Rih, with Makariv, with many others that are a bit forgotten.
And what's the challenge to work with the smaller communities comparable with the big cities?
I mean, obviously, small communities do not have much experience in international projects. So us being somehow, or trying to be the bridge between the international and the local, it's a bit, of course, more challenging with smaller cities, but still the energy, the will, and sometimes the less, let's say, complexity work with smaller cities is definitely an advantage. And in this sense, it's a lot also a pleasure to give some attention to these cities that do not receive New York Times coverage or World Bank projects, but they also require our support.
Interesting. Thank you very much for the interview, and I think we will meet each other in next time, and we will discuss with you the practical project that you lead right now and that you are leading right now, and probably you can share with us some practical tips that aren't under NDA to give our followers the view of the exactly expert area and the challenges and the risks that you had in the practical work, and probably we will do the little analysis of this
very glad
project that you have.
Very glad to do so, to dive in more in the project sphere. Next time I'm happy to show some of the project documentation that is not confidential, and really diving into the architectural, urban infrastructural design and planning, and to show how alternative or even innovative approaches, Ukraine is an innovative country, can be implemented. So looking forward to the continuation of the conversation, and thank you again for inviting.
Thank you, Harris.